So we'll get started today. This is Logic Prep's presentation on unpacking the UCAS application, learning about all things in the UK. And so for your panelists today, my name is Kevin. I'm one of our global college advisors here at Logic Prep. I am based in the UAE in Dubai, and I've been working with students applying to university all over the world for quite some time. I did my graduate level education in the UK myself, and I currently work at a British school in the UAE to some extent, and so that is my background in terms of university acceptance in the UK. I'll now have my colleague Krista introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Kevin. So my name is Krista Wright, and I am a guidance counselor here at Logic Prep, and I've been guiding students through UCAS applications for the last 7 years. A lot of my students come from Hong Kong, but I also help students in Riyadh, Dubai, and Brazil. So I think that's all you really need to know about me. And we're going to go ahead and share a presentation that we're going to be working off of so that all of you can see that in just one moment. And I really appreciate you guys sticking with us while we're ironing out some technical difficulties.
All right. So in terms of today's presentation, we're going to go over what is UCAS and the UK applications. There'll be some important timelines for you all just to get an idea of when things need to be done in terms of preparing for the UK and also how. And then we will also move forward with the UK application journey, what an application will do during its review process, both from, let's say, initial creation of the account all the way to its end, and then how to start an application, how to prepare, because the preparation process can be lengthy, and especially for our younger students, they might want to start a little bit earlier. So we will get started with that and then answer your questions. So, what is UCAS and what is how it all works? So, UCAS is a website. Think of the UCAS website as a hub for all things UK universities and careers. It's not just a website for university applications, it's also a career search engine where students can look through different subject guides. They can look through guides of different cities in the UK, different regions. They can look through course options, and the word course will unpack that definition in a little bit. Course options, entry requirements, certain career pathways, and even more. There are many routes to university in the UK. It's not just applying to a university and that's the journey. There are many other pathways and many other options for students, and UCAS is kind of the center for all of that, where many students will go to explore different options or see what else is out there. As a student, the application portal is UCAS. However, it is not a website that's just for students. Students will also be able to link their application to their school, which means their secondary school. And the school has their own version of UCAS, and so do universities. That means UCAS is kind of the meeting place for all different stakeholders in a British university application. Think the Common App in the US, but only bigger and slightly more robust. Because everything that goes into a university application in the UK is on UCAS, whether it's searching, applying, receiving offers, confirming offers, and in the university's case, also giving out the offers and reviewing the applications. So that's the whole entire journey. And that all happens in UCAS. UCAS is also limited to just 5 university applications. Students can only choose 5 with the same course. Again, we'll underline and circle the word course for a moment. Same course for the entire application. And there are no changes. Once the student is admitted, they attend the university, they can't change that course. Identifying that course is really crucial. But I will pass things on and over to Krista to explain a little bit more about that.
Okay, so first we're going to talk about the UK application timeline. So a lot of our students are applying to multiple countries, and so we just want to review the deadline specifically for the UK because there are some earlier deadlines than, say, even a lot of the schools in the US. So if you're applying to the universities on this slide, so Oxford or Cambridge, you might collectively hear them referred to as Oxbridge, or any medicine, dentistry, or veterinary science program, you will have an earlier deadline. You must submit your application by October 15th every year. That deadline never changes. So that means like making sure that you plan ahead. Kevin is going to talk a little bit more later about the importance of starting early, but make sure that you don't wait until fall to start on your application. I usually recommend students prepare their application even the summer before their of that year, or just make sure like the break before if you're on the Southern Hemisphere timeline, because you do want to plan to spend a couple of months preparing your application. If you're not applying to any of these specialized programs or to Oxford, Cambridge, you do have more time. So for instance, the 2025 deadline, so the upcoming application cycle is 29th of January, and it's usually around there, 29th, 30th of January. However, even though this is the final deadline, many universities will start to assess applications as they come in. So this is a bit like the US rolling admissions policy. So we do recommend that even if you don't have to apply by this October 15th deadline, I still recommend most of my students apply by around like mid to end November at the latest to have the highest chance of gaining an acceptance. And then we'll go to what are UK applications. So as Kevin mentioned before, we needed to underline that word course because there's some different terminology depending on the country you're talking about. So for a lot of times in like the US and other countries, we talk about course as an individual class, but in the UK, that's what they call their degrees essentially. So whereas in the US, we refer to those as majors, in the UK, that is your course of study, like what you will be earning a degree in. And as Kevin mentioned before, you can't change your mind after you get accepted. So it is really important that you identify the course that you want to study for the full, what you want to end up getting a degree in. And another interesting element of UK courses or degrees in this case is that your entire time will be spent studying that particular subject matter. So whereas in the US and other countries, a lot of times your degree studies only take up about half of your whole time at university. In the UK, you're only going to be studying that. So you want to make sure you really want to study this. Now, in terms of how are UK applications assessed? So students are going to be evaluated based on your preparation for that particular course of study. Since that's all you're going to be studying, more or less, they really want to see demonstrated interest and as well as already having some foundational knowledge in this subject. So this may be the classes that you've decided to take while still in high school. There will be very strict and transparent requirements for each individual course. So this can be really nice because sometimes in other countries you're not quite sure what they're looking for, but the UK will be very clear what they're asking to see in student applications. So entry requirements are fixed by course and they vary by course. So if you're applying to, let's say, Cambridge or King's in the UK, you will have different academic requirements whether you're applying to a finance degree or computer science. So they're very specific about that. And as I mentioned as well, it's quite transparent. So let's say we're talking like the IB curriculum, it's very common to hear an entry requirement that sounds something like overall score of 36 with a 666 at HL or A level AAA. And depending on the curriculum, they'll just tell you very clearly what they're looking for. And then the universities will then review based on the academics that you've brought to the table, how you are a good fit for that course. And one thing that we wanted to highlight here as well is that just because you're applying to 5 of the same course, so let's say you're applying to finance across the board, it's still important you do your research because not all universities will treat the same degree in the same way. So we still encourage you to look at the individual university's courses and see the individual classes that you'll be taking, the level of flexibility of the curriculum. Some universities allow you to have more elective choices while others are like very set out what you're going to be studying. So just make sure to do your research. But overall, what we want to just convey here is that it's extremely focused on your chosen course of study. You don't get to have a lot of flexibility to study anything outside of that course. And then we can move on to the types of courses offered in the UK. A lot of people don't know that there are many different types of courses. So I guess there's some similarity to the US as well, but a lot of people are I think, mostly aware of the 3 year degree, which is the most standardized degree in the UK. And again, it's just 3 years on your one course of study, but there are actually other types of degrees. So, for instance, a lot of our students are Brazilian, and if they study the native Brazilian curriculum, UK universities unfortunately do not accept this. So then what do? You're not out of luck. There are other pathways, as Kevin mentioned. So he's going to dive more into these in just a moment, but just to give you a really brief overview, so you have like the more standardized 3 year degrees, and then you have degrees with a foundation year entry, which will make that degree 4 years, international year one, courses where you can study abroad for a year, courses where you can have a professional placement for a year, which they call a year in industry, and standalone international foundation years. So I'm going to pass this over to Kevin now so he can give you more information on these different types of pathways.
Thanks, Krista. So those different pathways will vary depending on the student, their curriculum, their background. So, for example, that foundation year that Krista mentioned, it is an extra year of study that is attached to the 3 year degree, and it's often looked at as a top up to learning. So, like Krista mentioned, the Brazilian diploma would require a foundation year. That is a foundation year where the student would go right from high school and complete that year. And then if they are able to get a certain percentage, they will move on to the next 3 years of their degree. We also see this for the American curriculum, high school students without APs, where they'll have the high school diploma and then move onward from that. But it's usually a foundation year that's continued on right through. So it's a 4 year degree at the same university. International year one, this is still a 3 year degree, but it's a more supportive first year. These are often run by third party providers, but located on a university campus where the student will be at a university. They will be studying in university facilities. They will be studying with university professors, but it's a smaller class size. It's maybe more of a community based experience, which means that they will have a community with their international year one students. They might not be necessarily mixing with the rest of the university students. These are often for students who are international students coming from, let's say, international curricula, maybe didn't get the grades for direct entry. Courses with year abroad and courses with industry kind of sound exactly what the title says, except in reality, they're still 3 year academic degrees, but then that fourth year is used for the student to get a further experience. Usually it's paid in some way, where the student's either in another country, perhaps working or learning, or actually working in industry in the UK, where they're able to enhance their learning environment by putting it into practice. These are still 4 year degrees, like I said, with high entry requirements, not too much higher than, let's say, the particular course, like Krista mentioned, finance. A finance course with a year abroad or year in industry won't have too different of entry requirements, but it would have that additional year. Standalone foundation years, why we're talking about these separately is because they do exist. These foundation years are essentially provided years which are not attached to any university per se, or if they are, they're only 1 year in sequence. So after the year, the student will not only receive a grade, but they will have to reapply again to a university, which is unlike the first one I mentioned. So these standalone foundation years are just 1 year of study. The student will do their 1 year, and then after they're done, they'll apply on UCAS all over again to universities for a 3 year course. So they're a little bit less, let's say, secure. However, why we put them here is because some students maybe want that experience. They want to do 1 year in the UK, maybe improve their English, maybe improve their subject area knowledge, and then have the flexibility to try another university later on. Those are the entry points into the UK. I also want to talk about the curriculum and the exams that the students are doing. So the various curricula out there for different high school students. I want to reiterate that each student will have their own journey to the UK, and every single student will have their grades and their transcripts evaluated according to what they bring to the table. And that can always be different. Some students will do the American diploma, but they will also do IB subjects. That's an entire one way of reviewing the student's academic ability. Another student will do just the full IB diploma. Some students will do A levels, some students will do AS levels and B Tech. It really depends. And so I want to kind of bring this up that every student will be evaluated a little bit differently. And it's important to know that in every application process, it will differ for the students. Now, if a student is doing those, let's say, final examinations, that's where you'll usually find the most clear entry requirements. But in some cases, even with very clear entry requirements, some university courses are capped by the UK government, or they're just capped in number. And that for international students in particular. These are courses in medicine, engineering in some respects, in law, in dentistry, where you will find either capped courses, meaning capped in number, that's particularly for medicine and dentistry, or courses that will be more competitive with competitive entry requirements and examinations, engineering and law for those. If you are doing some research, you will find that there are some entrance examinations that take place. Usually these will take place in the new school year for the Northern Hemisphere. I want to say that will be toward the end of the school year for the Southern Hemisphere, if I've gotten my calendar dates correct. But this is when they will take place. Students can take them in an allocated time frame, usually between July and October. That's when they'll be taken. These are called the UCAT, that's for medicine and dentistry, LNAT for law. TMUA is one of a couple maths-based examinations which take place now, and these are more commonly seen for courses in engineering and, of course, mathematics. Over to Krista.
Yes. Okay. So now I'm going to cover a little bit more of the different elements of a UCAS application. So, of course, the first part of this will be registering for the UCAS application itself and filling in all your personal details with your grades and the reference letter. So, this is the responsibility of the school and the student. So, on the side of the student, you just need to register for the application, add your courses that you're going to be applying to, and your personal details. And then we'll talk more about what the school is going to contribute to that in the next slide. But that's that part of the just application itself. Now, an important part of the application on top of the courses that you select is the personal statement. And this is the personal statement is very different from, let's say, if you are applying to the US, where it's more of a personal story. In the UK, the personal statement for parents out there, it reads almost like a cover letter when you're applying to a job, where it's your job to highlight your previous experiences that make you a great fit for that role. So a UK personal statement is laser focused on your course, and it's entirely basically a story of where your interest in the course came from, and then describing how you've developed your interest in that over time. So this can be talking about going above and beyond your high school curriculum by taking summer or online courses. It could be books that you've read. UK universities love to see the students have read books on the subject to expand their knowledge. Could be internships, extracurricular activities, competitions, but everything is going to be focused on the course at hand. So if you're applying to an engineering degree, 80% of your essay is what have I done to explore my interest in engineering? And that's why before, when Kevin was saying when you apply to 5 courses, it's all the same course. Because if you can imagine, I do have some students saying, oh, but I kind of am interested in engineering and kind of in business. You can see there's no way to write an effective personal statement that's going to be trying to toe the line between these 2 courses. So that's why it's very important to select 5 very, very related courses, because that one personal statement will be read by all 5 courses you apply to. So also, of course, this means please don't mention the name of any specific university, in the personal statement because it will be read by everyone else as well. So in terms of the style of the essay, it is much more academic in tone. As I mentioned, it's a little bit more like a cover letter. And I do recommend students, as I mentioned, start drafting this several months before they plan to apply to make sure you give yourself enough time to get feedback on it and go through several drafts. And then, so that's like the part of the application that a student has quite a lot of control over because it's more creative in nature. But then there's an additional layer that is an exam. So, as Kevin mentioned before, there are entrance exams for very specific courses, but everybody most likely will need to take an English language exam. I see this requirement even for some students who are in like the A level or IB in an international country where the official language is not English. So sometimes universities will allow students to kind of satisfy this requirement from an IB course, but I really, really stress that you should check the fine print, because most students are going to have to take either Pearson language exam, or here on this slide is much more common. It's called an IELTS, and it specifically needs to be the IELTS academic with UKVI approved. And that's going to, each individual course will have a requirement for the level that you need to reach in order to qualify for that program. And this is something you want to also start in advance to make sure that you can register for an exam sitting and have time to take it more than once if need be. It's not, it's often that students don't necessarily need to take it more than once, but just give yourself the time to make sure that if you don't get the score you want the first time, that you do have time to resit it again. And then, as this mentions before, give yourself enough time to take up any entrance exams specific to your subject area. So I think Kevin will mention more later, but for instance, the UCAT, which is the medicine entrance exam, that can take quite a bit of prep. So just be aware of the amount of time that you need to prepare for any of these standardized exams. So now we're going to move on to the journey of a US application. So the first step is, of course, creating your application account, and then it's going to ask you to link it to a center. Some students are confused by this, but this is nearly always just your school. And then that center or your school will be able to see your progress. So they'll be able to see if you've added your courses and filled things out, etc. They can provide feedback. And then as I mentioned before, what is it that the school is responsible for? So they're going to have a way to log into the portal where they're going to be able to insert your references and also add your predicted grades. These two elements, the students will not be able to see. Obviously, we can't let students see the recommendation letters. And oftentimes students are made aware of their predicted grades so that they can make, the choices for their courses based on where they're at academically, but that's just not shown to the student. You can't see that part from the student side of the application. Once everything is finished, the student will select a submits to center option. And then the school, again, is going to be the center most likely. They'll be able to do a final review, and then the school actually submits it to the university. So because of this, as we mentioned before, early planning is required, especially like don't submit this or click the submit to center button too close to the official deadline. Many of the students I work with have internal deadlines at their high school. So I always encourage students to check this, because not all high schools are great at communicating this to students. They'll tell them very close to that deadline. So ask if there are internal deadlines, because the school needs basically a grace period to be able to review everyone's applications and submit it from their end. So make sure you give a lead time. I would say, like, if they don't say anything to you, at least a week, but sooner rather than later is always better. Okay, and then I'll pass it over to Kevin for part two of the UCAS application journey.
All right, so part two, once that submission is done from the center's perspective, as well as the students, of course, the university will then review the application on a rolling basis. So it's an as received basis, meaning offers could come anytime after submission. That means the earlier the application, the faster reply, because when universities are getting more and more applications, they need more and more time to review the file. I just saw last year, for example, a student applied on a Thursday and she had 4 offers by Tuesday. So it can happen very quickly, depending on the course, depending on the university selected, depending on the timing. So it's very important that a student not only is aware of an early application, but also prepares in advance, like Krista has said, because if they do submit in, let's say, September, they could potentially get an offer back sooner. We don't necessarily always see this, especially for courses like medicine or engineering, which takes a little bit longer. Maybe they have an interview, but for courses in social sciences, liberal arts, it's much more common. In the UK, offers are always conditional. So this is very different from the US. Offers are always conditional and are based upon the entry requirements and the student's curriculum as well as their grades. So, for example, you will see for IB diploma, 35 points, 766 and higher level subjects. That would be a typical IB offer that you will see. And the student will need to meet that offer in order to meet the conditions of their offer. An A-level offer could be AAB. An American diploma offer could be 5 AP exams, all fives. So this does exist, these conditions. Occasionally, you'll even see more conditions. You may see an IELTS test condition, or a GCSE results condition, or an IB MYP results condition. It does depend on the student and their profile. Now, meeting the conditions will only happen officially once the results from the condition are received. So whether it's IB diploma grades, A-level grades, or American diploma APs, whatever that might mean, that must be sent to UCAS. Again, UCAS is our hub for everything. The student can wait a very long time before they get the final result from their exams, and then again from UCAS. It could be from, let's say, September. They won't hear and get everything finalized until July, perhaps, or August. That's when offers are made unconditional. And the student will then hopefully be ready to receive their confirmation of studies document called a CAS to apply for their visa, assuming they need one. But like I said, this all happens in the summertime in the Northern Hemisphere. So there is quite a length of time between when a student may apply and when they will finalize everything. But that's just how the UK works. They might be wondering, well, how does this work for visas? Thankfully, the UK VI, which is the UK immigration entity, is very quick with visas and they turn them around quite fast. And as long as the student is proactive and is following the correct steps, they can have it issued right away. And also, university begins a little bit later than it does in the US, about a month later, sometimes even a little bit further on. There are universities which begin at the end of September, right now, basically, as we're recording this webinar. Universities are beginning in the UK. So it's slightly different in terms of timeline as well. And Krista will finish off part 4.
Okay, so if any of you are wondering, okay, so what happens if I don't meet my predicted grades in my final examination? After all, these are just predictions. So it can be a bit of a nerve-wracking wait, as Kevin just pointed out, but there are systems in place for if this happens, because of course, not everyone meets these predicted grades. So if you end up with a final examination result that is lower than the conditions that were required by the offer that you wanted to accept, then there's a couple of things that you can do. First, you can contact your top choice university and explain the situation and see if they would still have space for you at the university. But this is just if they have space available, and this is exceptional. It doesn't often happen. Also, you can think about the more competitive the university, the less likely they're just going to have empty seats laying around for you to join. So that's one route. A more common route is to enter something called clearing. So this happens around July and August, which is when these public examination results are often released. And what the student actually does is you're going to contact the universities, usually by phone. You'll have your UCAS applicant number, and you will ask if they have any seats available for the program or course that you're trying to join. And you'll be able to talk with them about what you did get in your final examination results and see if they want to make you an offer. And then they'll be able to indicate that in your UCAS application, as Kevin mentioned, very robust application, and you can accept the offer through that application. And another thing to point out is that this doesn't just apply to students who missed their offer. It also can work for students who exceeded their predicted grades. So I worked with a student last year who worked really, really hard from the time he submitted his initial applications in November until his final exams in the next summer in the June, and he ended up achieving much higher than he was predicted. So he went through clearing to call higher ranked universities saying, I actually got a lot higher, and do you have any seats available for me with my now pretty stellar grades? And he was able to actually gain acceptance at a more competitive university. So I just point this out that if at this point in your predicted grades or in your educational journey, if you are in one of the curriculums that uses predicted grades, there's still a chance for you in clearing if you do end up achieving a lot higher than that prediction. So either way, there are these systems in place for what happens if that predicted grade wasn't accurate for your final exam results. Be just very aware that if you do enter clearing and it's due to the fact that you missed your offers, move quickly because as soon as the seats are gone in these programs, that's it. So you do want to start contacting universities and asking to see if they have open seats as soon as possible. And as the slide says, there's no guarantees in clearing. So again, move as quickly as possible. And ideally, you would not have to enter this round, but it does happen occasionally. It's also one thing that I like to mention to students of when you're building your initial course list, don't apply to 5 courses with the exact same entry requirements, because then what happens if you do drop just like a little bit? So give yourself a little bit of a cushion and making sure that one of your courses has a lower entry requirement so that you have that cushion to fall back on, so you don't have to enter clearing. But if it happens, we can help you with that. Or there are mechanisms in place so that you're not left out in the cold. Okay, I can pass it over to Kevin so he'll tell you more about when and how you should start this process.
Okay, so we've given you everything about UCAS and applying to the UK. You might be wondering, oh my goodness, what do I do now? Or maybe, okay, I know this now, but how does my child or I, if you're a student, start? Start with research. There are many courses out there, many pathways out there, and students need to learn what are they truly signing up for. Because in every university, like we said before, the course might be different, or what the student is learning could be different. What are they truly excited about learning in university? Because in a lot of scenarios, what they want to study is what they think is interesting, but then they may not have the right expectations. And if the students have a strong idea of what they want to study, they can then go forward toward that particular course because ultimately they can't change that when they get to the university. If a student is maybe a little bit on the younger side, they should start to work on building that evidence as to why they want to study that particular course. And this will be specific to the course that they're obviously applying to. So it could be extracurriculars, it could be research projects, internships. The student could be doing further reading, like Krista mentioned, listening to podcasts. They could be watching documentaries. They could be doing a course of some kind, a summer program. There are lots of opportunities out there that students could be getting involved with. If they're going for medicine or dentistry, they should be getting work experience, which is relevant to their course. That's almost mandatory, even if it's unwritten. The student should really be showcasing that they've had practical or hands-on experience with their subject area so that they can tie that into their personal statement. And if there's an interview, which does happen in some scenarios, the interview. It's also important to understand entry requirements. We talked about exams. These entrance exams usually require significant revision, like Krista also mentioned before. Students will need to spend a couple of months working on this revision and should plan that into their timeline, especially for something like the UCAT, which is competitive and difficult. Students are revising for 3 or 4 months in advance. Entry requirements are also fairly firm and they often go in the higher direction every year. So it's quite important that students are thinking about entry requirements thinking about exams and are aware of what they should be targeting in order to gain that offer of admission and hopefully move on to their target university once the offers become unconditional. I'll now pause and save us some time for questions. But before I do open up the spot for questions, I just wanted to reiterate that if you have any questions for Logic Prep, you can reach us at contact@logicprep.com and the team can help you out. Whether you're in New York, Brazil, or somewhere else in the world, they are your contact person. You'll also receive a feedback form via email right after we're done today, just to tell us how we did or if we can keep in touch. We'd love to hear your comments. Again, we appreciate your flexibility with the technology today, but you'll also be receiving that just afterward as well. So I'll stop sharing the screen for now, and we'll take your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to them in the next few minutes that we have here if there are any questions. All right, first question. Do students in the US have to take an English test? Usually, no. Students who have an English speaking passport, American, Canadian, usually a passport from the Commonwealth, or of course the UK, do not need an English exam. The only situation that could pop up is if the student, let's say, was educated outside the US and they list that their first language is something else besides English, but generally speaking, no, they don't need one. And the next question, do US high schools have a buzzword? So yes, buzzwords are the words that, for those who don't know, are the word that is used to link the student's UCAS application to their high school. Every high school should have one. Now, this I don't mean to point fingers, but I have to do it a little bit, unfortunately. Not every school will be registered as a center for UCAS for many reasons, especially in the US where they maybe aren't familiar with applying to the UK. But US high schools should have one. If they don't have one, um, essentially it's a slightly different journey to applying to the UK. If there's no buzzword, the student would be applying almost independently. Or they could contact the UK university directly and explain the situation. But all high schools should have one unless they've never had a UK applicant before, then they would probably have to create a center or the student would have to contact the university directly to get their application processed.
I can take this one. Thanks, Kevin, before. So, should my student get a different letter of recommendation for his UCAS application, different from the ones for US? So, the students that I've worked with, the style and length of the reference letters tend to differ between the UK and US, and the way that they're submitted are also different. So, for the US, you're going to be adding your referee's name and contact information into your Common App, and the Common App will reach out to the referee in order for them to upload their reference letter into the counselor side of the common application. Whereas in the UCAS application, it's usually your counselor, tutor, higher education counselor, something of this nature, that's going to collect the reference letters from your teachers and insert them herself into the UCAS application. So the process is a bit different, but you can ask the same teachers and the same people for the reference letters. You just might want to give them a heads up and educate them a little bit about the difference in style and length between the US and the UK. And for students that I've worked with, if any of you are working with or are parents of children in IB or A level curriculum, it's been my experience that they'll automatically just ask the HL teachers or your full A level teachers for the reference letters. So at some high schools, there's also not as much flexibility in terms of choosing your recommenders. These are good questions. Any other questions?
Question?
You want to take this one, Kevin, or should I?
To you?
I'd like to hear what you have to say because I shared my opinion, so I want to see if you have anything to add.
Sure. All right. So, content of a UCAS letter of recommendation. It is different. So it's more academically inclined. The writer of the reference will highlight the students, let's say, abilities in the classroom, their attributes academically, ideally an example of where they've excelled in maybe a certain topic area, or in a certain concept they've covered. Now, every school will do references a little bit differently. Some may do it a little more of a summative, where there's a tutor or perhaps a school counselor who is looking at it from different perspectives. Some other times it might be, let's say, a teacher from a certain subject area, and they will collate a couple other different subject areas in alignment with that. But primarily, it's academic in nature. Usually, it's example driven or exemplar driven, and focusing on more of those academic related attributes. Um, and that is how that is all put together. It's also important to note that the UCAS reference is not structured the same way as a US letter either. It's not a formal 1 page or 2 page PDF that's uploaded. It's actually text boxes. So the questions that the referee is given is actually broken up slightly different. So the style and the way the content is just structurally is different. Of course, we one would never know that unless you were actually filling out the reference yourself. But as someone who has done them many times, I can say that even how the referee enters the UCAS reference is completely different than the US common application recommendation letter.